Why does El Salvador have a higher HDI than Honduras? And does El Salvador deserve this HDI? So here's some statistics. As you can see, El Salvador has an HDI rank of 116 with an HDI of 0.666, while Honduras has an HDI of 0.606 and a rank of 131. So from all these statistics, I've concluded that El Salvador has a higher HDI and GNI rank. Honduras' GNI is almost half of El Salvador's, even though Honduras has a larger population and a larger country. And El Salvador students, on average, get a year more of schooling. Both countries have a negative trade balance, which means they import more than they export. Honduras has almost twice the amount of exports as El Salvador, but is still a lower HDI than El Salvador, and both countries are very literate. So why is this? Both countries are in Central America. They share borders. They both are on the ocean for shipping. Neither have an advantage or disadvantage regarding location that the other doesn't have. So the history of the countries, El Salvador had a civil war in the late 80s, early 90s that the U.S. supported with military. And so this really broke the economy. And then they had a hurricane and an earthquake, and they just really couldn't recover from that. Honduras, on the other hand, has always been a developing country, and it was hit by Hurricane Mitch. So geography, El Salvador has lots of volcanoes, and heavy rains, but it has warm weathers with temperatures similar to the temperatures here in South Africa. Honduras, on the other hand, has very rough topography. The majority of the population is very isolated in the mountains, while a minority is in the lowlands. So Honduras' weather, it's very hot and humid, which makes it very hard to work, with northern winds and a long rain season. Resources, El Salvador doesn't have any minerals that are exploitable, very few fertile lands. However, it does have the Lempa River, which the country uses to produce hydroelectric power. Honduras, on the other hand, has lots of fertile land to grow agriculture, and pine forests and a few deposits of different minerals. So regarding the economy, El Salvador is not self-sufficient. They have to import food, but it's probably because they favor commercial growth in crops, and so any peasants or personal farmers don't have any land to grow food for themselves. After the war, they really destroyed their economy, but they signed a free trade agreement with the U.S., so they've been doing better. Honduras, on the other hand, has always been a poor country. Most of the workers have little rights and long hours, and so finally a labor code was passed, but it's still not up to where it should be. Regarding the industry, El Salvador used to do mostly agricultural in the 70s and 80s, but now they barely do anything agricultural, with mostly exporting clothing and sugar along with some other things, while Honduras is majority agricultural with lots of cattle, poultry, pigs, and lots of other fruits and vegetables, and a little lumbering and mining and fishing. So the government, El Salvador has a president who serves a 5-year non-renewable term with 3 branches, and the National Assembly, which is the legislative branch, has 1 house and a 3-year term. Because of this, it's ranked 95 out of 176 for corruption. Honduras, on the other hand, has a 4-year term for president, and the National Congress has authority to check the actions right up until 1931, when several people were forced to resign, and so now nobody is really checking the actions of the president, Juan Orlando Hernandez. Therefore, it's ranked 123 out of 176 for corruption. Other indicators include poverty, where El Salvador only has 3.3% of the population living at $1.90 a day. Honduras, on the other hand, has 18.9% of the population in poverty. Honduras is more unequal and has a lot more crime. In 2012, it was the most deadly country. It has improved and now is the only sixth most deadly country. El Salvador, on the other hand, is the eighth most deadly country and has one of the highest homicide rates in the world, with a rumor that the January 11th this year in 2017 was the first day in 2 years that they didn't have a homicide. So what do I conclude from this? From this, I understand that El Salvador has a higher HDI, and I agree with that because they're getting more education. There's slightly lower crime rate, not by a lot, but it is lower, and that's very important. Less of the population is in poverty. There's less corruption. The economy is more efficient and gets more done. The climate is milder. It's a lot easier to work in a climate that's mild and there's no extreme heat or extreme cold. And it has less rain and it's a little less intense. And they also set up a trade agreement with the U.S., which makes it easier to boost the economy. So El Salvador, the smallest yet most densely populated country in Central America, has a higher HDI than a large country like Honduras. And these are my sources. Thank you.